When most people think of fly fishing, they think of dry flies. Most dry flies imitate flying insects that lay their eggs on the water.
Get me a nice fish.
Different insects appear at different times of the year, so fly fishermen often try to match the hatch by carrying a large assortment of dry flies. There are over 1,000 different dry fly patterns and variations. When first getting started with fly fishing, I recommend you start with a very simple assortment of dry flies and gradually increase your collection as you learn more about the waters you fish and what type of bugs are common there. Most dry flies are meant to imitate mayflies. These are insects that live in a stream as a nymph, usually for a year, then hatch out of the water, fly upstream for a few days, lay their eggs on the water, and die. Mayflies are most common in the spring, but also appear throughout summer and fall. There are over 3,000 species of mayflies, and while it may be good to match specific types on certain streams during certain times of the year, I recommend you start out with a very generic mayfly pattern that does a fairly good job of imitating the average mayfly. This would be the Adams. Start with a size 16. The parachute Adams is usually the preferred fly to use, except it doesn't float well in rough water. In that case, use a traditional Adams. It works almost as good. The second most common insect fish eat on the surface would be caddisflies. They may also be referred to as sedges. Caddis are those little bugs you see in the water that live in a cocoon. The adults look like a moth. After they hatch, they fly upstream, lay their eggs, and die, just like mayflies do. There are over 14,000 species of caddis, but don't worry, you only need one fly pattern to imitate most caddisflies. That would be a tan elk-hair caddis, size 14. The Griffith's gnat is a small fly that can be used to imitate either midges or gnats on the surface. These flies may be difficult to fish because they are small and hard to see. However, when the mayflies and caddisflies aren't hatching, the trout may still be feeding on gnats or midges. Midges in particular are known to hatch during cold weather, especially early spring, before any other bugs are on the surface. A number 14 mosquito can be the best fly when fishing ponds or lakes. It does not work well on fast-moving trout streams because mosquitoes prefer to lay their eggs in still waters. When you just want to throw a dry fly out there and not worry about matching any particular insect, a fly that floats well even in turbulent water, and a fly that is easy to see, just get a number 10 royal wolf. It would not be a good choice in clear, slow-moving streams that receive a lot of pressure, but in other places, it can work as good as any other fly. Dry flies are by far the most popular approach taken by traditional fly rod anglers. Part of the reason for this is the visual aspect of a trout taking a fly on the surface, but another reason is because dry flies are the easiest fly to fish with their fly rod. A spinning rod fisherman can fish all fly types with relative ease. Also, consider that trout typically feed on the surface only 10% of the time. If there are a lot of fly rod fishermen fishing dry flies in an area, then those trout tend to become wary of anything on the surface, and catching them on a dry fly can become difficult. In those situations, it is advisable to fish below the surface with a nymph or soft hackle. You need to add floating material to a dry fly, otherwise it will sink in a short time. There are many different types of floatants, and they all work relatively well. After catching a couple fish on a dry fly, it may become waterlogged and stop floating. In that case, you'll have to tie on a fresh fly. Use a floating crankbait to cast out your dry fly. You will want a thin, streamlined model. Remove the hooks from the lure and add some tungsten putty if necessary to give it back weight so it casts far enough. Connect your main line to the rear of the crankbait using a swivel. Connect your fly line leader to the top of the swivel, the same place the main line is connected to. This will help to reduce line twist. I have found 2 feet of line from your fly to the crankbait is usually enough line. If you want to increase your leader length, you can. There's no need to exceed 3 feet to your first fly. I like to fish 2 different dry flies at a time. Allow at least 18 inches between your first and second fly. Trout can be finicky, especially when feeding on the surface. I've seen trout reject one fly but then go on to take the second fly, and if I didn't have that second fly, I would not have caught the trout. While some spin fishermen use a bobber to cast out their dry flies, I strongly advise against that. In my experiences, bobbers scare fish. Crankbaits do not. Many times, crankbaits get the fish's attention in a positive manner. If the fish begin repeatedly hitting the floating crankbait, you may want to swap in a version that has a hook on it. When fishing still waters or slow-moving streams, it can really pay to give your fly a twitch. In the two examples shown here, the brook trout and cutthroat would not hit the fly until it was twitched. This is easy to do with a crankbait, but if you try doing this with a bobber, you will probably spook the fish. A common technique when fishing a dry fly is to attach a small sinking fly below it. This works best with flies having good flotation ability, such as a royal wolf, an elk-hair caddis, or a hopper. The dropper fly should be lightweight, such as a number 16 hare's ear or number 18 pheasant tail.